On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to take a look at Daniel chapter 7, one of the best chapters for prophetic studies found in the entire book. It's the story of four beasts that rise up out of the sea of humanity. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me Daniel chapter 7.
Daniel chapter 7 is the big one. This one talks about the four kingdoms, and they are described as four beasts. And J.R., this vision came to Daniel in roughly 555 B.C., in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed, and then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. And the first thing he sees is the sea, a picture of a sea, and four beasts emerge from the sea.
And it's interesting, by the way, just in passing, that this was a great sea and that the four winds strove upon the great sea. So this was turbulent waters here. And the first beast he sees rise up out of the sea is a lion. Had eagle's wings. He says, I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Gary, let's discuss the prophetic significance of this lion. First of all, primarily, it has to do with Babylon, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed. The Babylonian lion is extremely well known as the rampant beast that symbolized Babylon.
In fact, Daniel had an experience with the lions of Babylon, didn't he?
He did, and
Well,
he certainly did. This lion has eagle's wings. As a matter of fact, on the walls of old Babylon, to this very day, in the ruins, you can see lions with eagle's wings.
Yes. Now, according to this, the eagle's wings were plucked from the back of the lion, and the eagle's wings were lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man. Or is it the lion that was lifted up from the earth, Gary?
Well, it seems to be the lion that's lifted up from the earth and made to stand up like a man, and a man's heart or a man's mind or thinking was given to it. And you know, the primary interpretation of this is Nebuchadnezzar himself, who started out as a kind of a beast, and toward the end of his reign, he finally was given sanity, and he stood up in the form of a man. And
a man's heart was given to it, meaning that he regained his sanity after his 7 years of insanity.
Right. Yeah.
In fact, Hippolytus, who lived around 170 A.D. to 236 A.D., born in 170, a student of Irenaeus and contemporary with Irenaeus, who was a student of Polycarp, who was a student of the Apostle John himself, and that's pretty good credentials. As a pastor of a church in Rome, no less, he says that this represents the kingdom of Babylon, and that the wings represent Nebuchadnezzar, plucked off, he lost his mind, and then made to stand upon its feet. He regained his mind, his glory, and the man's heart was given to it. He gave God the glory for lifting him back up again. Fascinating.
Now the
now
second...
let's talk about, before the second beast, let's talk about the alternatives. You know, in my opinion, prophecies don't always mean just one thing. Is it not possible that this represents something in the end of the ages?
Oh, sure. I know what you're going to say.
Could this not be, for example, Great Britain, whose symbol was a lion, and the eagle's wings America, plucked from the back of the lion? Now, I'm not here to tell you that it is. I'm just here to tell you that those are symbols, modern symbols today of those nations, and the reason the possibility is there is because they're prominent nations and definitely involved in end-time events. There is one more suggestion here. Could that lion be the tribe of Judah, who is lifted up from the sea of humanity and brought back to their promised land?
It's very possible.
On wings of eagles, you know? At least there's a prophecy that says they'll be brought back on wings of eagles. So those are some of the possibilities to think about. Let's look at the next one now, Gary.
Yeah, the next one, it says, "And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh." And this bear with 3 ribs in his teeth could very well be Medo-Persia.
According to 2nd century theologians, it was Medo-Persia. And of course, the fact that we have this vision of Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2, wherein we saw a monster man with a head of gold, arms of silver, midsection of brass, legs of iron, which we are told they are representative of those nations, then this appears to be just 4 different symbols of the same group. I'm not real sure they are, but while we're there, it is interesting to note that the 3 ribs in his mouth says Hippolytus, pastor of the church in Rome in AD 200 or so, says they point to the 3 nations, the Persians, the Medes, and the Babylonians, which were expressed by the image of the silver and gold in Nebuchadnezzar's dream as well.
And now so we have a lion, a bear, the next one is a leopard. You know, if you give a modern interpretation to these, the lion could be Great Britain in the 20th century. The bear could be Russia. And the next one is a leopard with 4 wings on its back, which could easily be Germany.
Yes.
And then, of course, the 4th beast, the dreadful beast, is yet to come. But let's read about this 3rd beast. "After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had on the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it." So this is the leopard beast.
Now this leopard the symbolism comes from Nimrod. Under the symbol of the leopard, he gained power, control over the world of his day. And this leopard then may be a takeoff from that original leopard, for the leopard skin became a symbol of authority and power to many of the kings and potentates of the past. But let's consider the possibility for a moment, Gary, that it could be Germany. You know, Hitler tried to establish the Third Reich, but we see 4 wings here. Will there be a 4th Reich?
Well, no. That would soon seem to be the case. At least somebody's going to try in the near future. You know, this leopard, we know he's the Grecian leopard in history. And those 4 wings are the 4 generals of Alexander the Great. That's the common interpretation.
And the 4 heads, the kings themselves.
Right. And so we know that there's an ancient interpretation. The modern interpretation, if this is Germany, certainly the leopard was an identifier of Nazi Germany.
The leopard tank is the tank of Germany today. Now, there are some who suggest that the Arabs are depicted by this leopard. Where they get the idea, I'm not real sure, but anyway, I thought I'd pitch it out there for you to consider. Now let's talk about the 4th beast. This is the one that's dreadful.
Verse 7, "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things." Much has been said about this.
Yes. Hippolytus, who was pastor of the church in Rome somewhere around 200 to 236, died as a martyr in 236, says, "The 4th beast was dreadful and terrible, had iron teeth, claws of brass. Who then are meant by this but the Romans, whose kingdom, the kingdom that still stands, is expressed by the iron?" And I would have to say that even modern day interpretations of this would be the revived Roman Empire. Since it has 10 horns, which seem to be commensurate with the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's vision, I would have to say that this is the final world empire of the tribulation period, wherein the Antichrist will rise to power. And we're going to talk about these horns in a moment, Gary, when we come back. And we see this little horn who comes up among them, and he plucks up 3 horns by the roots. What in the world could that have reference to? We know that it's at the end of time, because the next verses say that the Ancient of Days sits upon his throne of judgment, and the Son of Man comes before him. We'll look at that when we return in just a moment. I want you to bear in mind that the Syriac language that begins in chapter 2 concludes with the last verse of chapter 7, the chapter that we are now looking at. That means then, Gary, we are very near the end of the times of the Gentiles at this point.
As a matter of fact, verse 9 of chapter 7 says it all. Daniel says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit. Now those thrones are Gentile thrones, Gentile dominions.
Yes.
And the Ancient of Days, of course, is the Lord Jesus Christ. This is his enthronement on the throne of David. He sits, his garment is like snow, his hair is like pure wool, his throne is of fire, and it says here, and his wheels were like burning fire. And the fiery stream that comes out from the throne and those fiery wheels are all of the angelic host who are doing his bidding. This is the great white throne, I think.
You know, I see Revelation chapter 4, and God sitting upon his throne with the scroll in his hand, and then all of the things that come from that are all embodied in these verses right here.
And Revelation 5, where the Lamb comes.
Yes.
And Revelation 5, roughly verses 6 through about 10, where John says, I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne of the 4 beasts, in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb, as if it had been slain. And, you know, that reminds me of this time as well.
Yes. And in chapter 7 of Daniel, in verse 10, it says the judgment was set when the books were opened. So he breaks the seals of the book. And it says in verse 13, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people and nations and languages should serve him, and his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. That's the kingdom that Jesus Christ is coming to establish. Utopia is coming, folks, to this planet. Unfortunately, the Gentiles don't want to receive it. They have this political insanity, not willing to give Jesus Christ the preeminence due him. But judgment is coming one of these days. Gary, let's talk about this little horn now, the Antichrist, and his machinations.
Well, we have 10 horns. We have the little horn who plucks up 3 of those horns, and he has eyes like a man and a mouth speaking great things. This is the very wording we find repeated in Revelation concerning the Antichrist. Revelation chapter 13, he's called a mouth speaking great things. And this Antichrist is to be one of the 10 kings, apparently, in the latter days. That is to say, when this final global system is set up, we're going to have such a wonderful global political network that the Antichrist will say to himself, you know, this would work better if I were the head of it. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
And whenever you get politicians together, you've got them maneuvering for the top spot.
Oh, yes.
And so we have here in verse 24 of Daniel chapter 7, the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. And let me just pause here to say the Club of Rome back in 1974 suggested that the United Nations divide the world up into 10 political economic regions. And these 10 divisions of the world would be headed up each by a leader, a ruler, which obviously will not be elected by the people. So we cannot call him a president or a prime minister. He would be along the lines of a monarch. And one of the leaders of these 10 globalized regions will become the Antichrist. And here he says he shall devour the whole earth. So in my opinion, this means it could not just be 10 nations of Europe,
Right.
or the revived Roman Empire around the Mediterranean, because he's going to devour the whole earth and tread it down and break it in pieces. And then he shall speak great words against the Most High and wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. Now that's kind of interesting. He's going to persecute the Jews. Do we not have some kind of persecution going on even today, Gary?
Oh, yes, we do. And the persecution comes out of the very people who are the planners of this global system. Some of them come from the United States, some of them come from Europe, some from the Far East. They're all getting their heads together and trying their best to create a global situation.
And instead of bringing peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, more problems are being developed by these people who supposedly have good intentions. The United Nations crowd, they condemn Israel regularly. In the Security Council, every time Israel turns around, Israel cannot even defend itself.
Now, this horn, verse 21, is said to make war with the saints and to prevail against them until the Ancient of Days will come at a certain point. And at that time, he will judge the world. It says, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came the saints possessed the kingdom. And then, after this statement is made, J.R., we have an interpretation of the fourth beast as the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and as you mentioned, shall devour the whole earth. So it's got to be a global arrangement of some sort.
I think the sponsor will be the United Nations. And the United Nations will, by the way, through the GATT treaty and the NAFTA treaties, they're already regionalizing the economics of the situation, of the world's various countries. Even in the Western Hemisphere, Canada is considering adopting the U.S. dollar as its currency. Mexico is considering adopting the U.S. dollar as its currency, and many other countries to the south as well. So we see a region, an economic region developing here.
Yeah.
This is true also in Europe with the euro, and it will be true in other regions of the world as this thing develops, because there are people planning this world government even as we speak. It should not be long in coming, Gary. It should be coming.
That's right.
Pretty quickly. The thing that will cause this thing to really congeal, I think, is war. A war in the Middle East.
I think so too. Now, there are two verses in chapter 7 that are really important. Verse 24 and verse 25. Verse 24 says, and the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, that is different, and he shall subdue 3 kings. A lot of people have said this could refer to the first half of the tribulation. And the next verse, the second half, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given to his hand until a time, and the times, and the dividing of time. And so we have here possibly, not to be dogmatic, but possibly a layout of the first and second half of the tribulation period.
And when he speaks great words against the Most High, Gary, that sounds like the abomination of desolation to me.
It certainly does, yeah.
This times represents 2 years, it's plural, and time represents 1 year, that's a total of 3, and dividing of time represents half a year, that's 3.5 years. That's true in Daniel, it's also true in the book of Revelation, as John picks up the terminology of Daniel and uses it in chapter 11 and so on.
Now, there are a lot of people who say that there's no place that you can really find a 7-year tribulation in the Bible. But by inference, we find it, I think, in many places. Verses 24 talks about his rise to power. In Revelation, that takes place during really the first half of the book of Revelation. And then his dominance is the second half of the tribulation. And I think verses 24 and 25 here follow that same pattern.
And we have the second coming of Christ in verse 27, as it says, the kingdom and dominion and greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. And with this final verse, hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. Thus ends the Syriac language. We'll get back to the Hebrew language in chapter 8. It also ends the times of the Gentiles. We'll be back in just a moment.